and it was coming back and saying, hey, look, guys, we got a problem here. We got a problem. The real problem is knowing where our own people are, and having it so that it wasn't just one guy who 20, 30 minutes later knew where he was, but he knew where he was right where he was standing. He couldn't move because, So that, I hope that gives you an example, but it's an example that over and over and over again at DARPA is how we do business. I mean, at least when I was there, and sometimes people get away from that, but they always come back because it is the right way for innovation. Is to first say, what is the problem? Okay. And when you describe the problem, that is what creates innovation, in the sense of people innovating to solve that problem. It's usually not the other way around. I mean, people were spending a lot of money, but usually it ends up somebody comes up with a problem that needs to be solved, that this technology, if it can be made to work, will solve it. I can go on more, but that's sort of the general part.
You touched on this, and I want to draw it out a little bit, but the golden ring for research and development in DoD is the transition point. That's what everybody's shooting for. And it's really tough for all the wrong reasons. I mean, the planning and the programming that goes into building out budgets and requirements and all of that stuff is the barrier. Were there any things that you did, and let's just use GPS as an example, were there any things that DARPA set out to do to facilitate bridging from the demonstrated prototype to a program, getting it inserted?
Well, yes, there was, and it was really more straightforward than you might think. The way that we would do that is we would actually go and get some prototypes. Okay? Now, they may not be the final prototype, but they prototype which was representative enough, and then go out and show people what difference it made, okay? How it solved this problem or what difference it would make. And it was in that we overcame the resistance of something new. By the way, it's no different in the commercial market. In fact, it's sometimes even worse in the commercial market. In the commercial market, you got people out there making money selling something, okay? And they may not, this kind of thing came and it was a disruptor, okay? There were people obviously selling things to have people kind of know where they were, but they were like the guy with the early backpack. It wasn't very fast, okay? It wasn't very, but you had an industry making maps. Remember, people made maps, and people in cars, we carried maps. We looked at damn maps. And trying to go places and trying to figure out where to go. So, but there was a whole industry that did that. And so something like this coming in was the same problem in the commercial world as it was in the DoD world. The words are different, but it really was the same problem. In DoD, we were disrupting a current way of doing things that maybe it wasn't the best, but people were comfortable with it, and that they knew that all of the shortfalls, and they could plan around that, and they rather than say, boy, if I can get where I am in a fraction of a second, and have that, what could I do? Same thing in the commercial world. It was a long time before, and the first users of all this stuff turns out were hikers. I mean, they were hikers. The first GPS systems were sold. The business was for people hiking. Okay, it was obvious that was a benefit to them because the maps didn't really follow. But it just really was. We had people doing businesses, making money, making profit, and here comes something which was going to disrupt that or disturb it. And the first reaction was kill it. Find out all the reasons why not to do it, because we got this business here. No different than DoD. No different than DoD. So I think you don't want to think it's a DoD problem. It's a human nature problem. Okay. It's really a human nature problem for change, and so the innovation is by definition change. And DoD has all of these protections that they are used to kind of prevent that from happening, because we got this whole infrastructure of doing it the way we're doing it, even if we know at least we can cope with it. Same thing in the commercial market. You got people who are making money doing it a particular way, and they are going to not have this new thing come in and just, rather than saying, my goodness, this is the wave of the future, I'm going to, no, what eventually happens is that's exactly what happens. What happens in this case is that companies were started who were not in the mapping business, who started selling the early GPS receivers and solutions. But it's not much difference. I mean, other than the words, but the DoD has resistance to it for all of those reasons. And in the commercial world, the same resistance is there, not written down in a way of like the government says, "Thou shalt not," but it's just a resistance of disrupting a current way of making money.
And it sounds like the lesson that you're talking about here, though, is that overcoming that resistance involves taking an idea to where you can demonstrate it, or its value proposition can be confirmed before you start pushing.
Absolutely. Well, you got to be doing both on the way. Okay, you can't wait until you have it to start advertising it. So you got to really start out, because you may find, and as was found, that the way that you really wanted to use it was kind of different than the way we in the beginning thought it would be. So you really want to be always probing that on the way, and because it's like the old say, this is not rocket science, okay? It really isn't. It's part of the issue, and so therefore you say, well, what does you need to have? Well, you need to demonstrate that this thing works, okay? So what does that mean? In our lexicon, you need a prototype, right? You need a prototype. It may not be in the final form factor, but it has to be close enough where, the early ones that were made were not down in, they most certainly did not fit into my phone that I'm looking at here, but that they were really a cigarette pack size or something like that. Maybe a little bit bigger, but something easy to carry around, okay? And so you could have a prototype that somebody could go and experiment with and find, hey, this really would be useful. Like I say, the first early days were really, it turned out were really with hikers as people who were in the business. But you had people who could say, hey, you know what, this is really interesting. We got a problem. We got these maps, and now we can find out where we are on these maps. And we can leave it that way. I can have this, and I can have it put in a coordinate system that I go over and look at on the map on that coordinate system, and make the translation. Or I can have a system allow me to do it. Now, what else was going on that made that happen is that the semiconductor technology was also got to the point where it was able to do great things in a very, very small form factor, okay? And it was the marriage of those two things that really made it. But it was again, to make that transition, it required that a prototype be made that people could go play with, okay? And when people played with it, they started using it in ways that the original people, like me, if you could put me back way in the beginning, did not think about. So it's developing a prototype that people can go and use is really a key for the transition, okay? If we hadn't been able to have gotten that chipset, which allowed it to be put into a relatively small form factor, so people could go use it, there wouldn't have been somebody who says, hey, you know what? Rather than taking the answer from here and then trying to find it on this map, why don't I try to put all of this in the same package, because the semiconductor guys are now getting things so small and so powerful that I can do it, okay? again, all of this is innovation, okay? But what you're doing is you're allowing that innovation to happen, but the real thing here is to have the prototype to have people say, hey, okay, this is neat. What problem can I solve with this? And again, back to what is the problem? What problem can I solve with now that I have something like this? Oh, here's a problem. And that to me is, I mean, I have a lot of stories that I could give you, but the one on the GPS receiver, I think, is something that everybody can relate to. Everybody can relate to it. Your phone has the results of me having, now, look, it would have happened sooner or later, it would have happened sooner or later. But I was in the business of solving problems. And here was a problem, and I also had money. So it was, I would say that my existence and DARPA's existence probably accelerated this capability by 10 years. Okay, by 10 years. Not that it wouldn't have happened, but we accelerated it easily by 10 years. Because and there's lots of examples of that in the DARPA world. Okay, but they all come from that the first step. What is the problem that we're trying to solve?
Was there an explicit role that DARPA played, either during this example or others, around the transition to commercialization? DARPA's got a lot of successes around spillover of technologies from inside DARPA to the marketplace. Is that serendipity, or is there forethought?
Well, it's a little bit of both. What would happen where we would get serious about trying to get it into the something into the commercial market is where, because the problem we would have is cost. Okay. Yeah, we can make these prototypes, and they really will work good for the DoD. But unfortunately, at the volume that we're making them, the capital to what we would need, and we would know how we could shrink it all down. Okay? But the capital required to do that was really pretty large. Okay, and so now it's not like we're creating a capability. Is a question of we're enhancing a current capability by making it smaller and also in a larger quantity. Now, but if you look at it from the DoD viewpoint, you could be satisfied with what we did. Now, having it move over to the commercial, having a commercial solution meant that there was a huge market where now the coin of the realm was not national security, but it was actually money. And so people could calculate, okay, it's going to take me this much capital to develop this technology so that I can make it at a high enough rate that it'll be access to a lot of people. And also, I know that my cost figure is going to have to be a number. And so it was a trade-off between what the cost had to be down to so that people would try it out, and also my capital cost of creating the capability, and how long would it take for me to be paid back. Okay, so the calculus and the evaluations outside of DoD went that way, where within DoD it was really a more smaller market, but national security was the coin. We wanted, and so it could go that far. But if you really